Welcome to the pre-recorded webinar which would walk you through the Civil Forfeiture Grant Program presented to you by the Community Safety and Victim Services Branch of the Ministry of Public Safety and Solicitor General. The branch respectfully acknowledges the territories of Indigenous nations across British Columbia where its work takes place. We honor and respect those who have kept and stewarded these lands since time immemorial. We encourage you to also take a moment to consider where you are watching this webinar and recognize and give thoughts to the land you are on. Today we will talk about the overview of the Civil Forfeiture Office, the process of civil forfeiture, and the Civil Forfeiture Grant Program itself. We will talk about the funding streams and criteria of the program, and will also review the sections of the application, provide some helpful tips for you as applicants. We will also discuss how funding decisions are made and provide you with a timeline for the grant process. We will also address frequently asked questions about the program. The Civil Forfeiture Office has been in operation in BC since 2006. It operates under the authority of the Civil Forfeiture Act. The Civil Forfeiture works to remove the proceeds of unlawful activity. The Civil Forfeiture Office is a self-funding entity with the funds being used to first operate the office in terms of the operating expenses and the staff. The remaining funds are distributed throughout the province as crime prevention grants through the Civil Forfeiture Grant Program. The grant program provides one-time funding through the proceeds from the civil forfeiture. Funding is allocated through several different funding streams that are chosen on an annual basis, and given the nature of where these funds are coming from, that is, through the civil forfeiture process, the amount that we have to distribute for grants is going to vary year over year. The funding streams include crime prevention, restorative justice, Indigenous healing, and gender-based violence. For those of you watching interested in applying for the police equipment and training grants, that stream is handled by the Civil Forfeiture Office, and you can email them directly at their generic inbox at civilfo@gov.bc.ca to get more information on the police equipment and training grant. The first stream that we will discuss is the crime prevention stream. This stream provides up to $40,000 in one-time funding to proposals that will implement evidence-based crime prevention and community safety initiatives that address criminal activity by providing direct supports for vulnerable individuals at risk of or currently involved in criminal activities and/or behavior, including prolific offenders. Stream 2 is restorative justice. This stream provides one-time funding of up to $40,000 to proposals that will support or enhance current restorative justice program delivery in communities across British Columbia, in particular, those that focus on improving capacity to serve victims. Proposals may include funding for the following: capacity development, participant supports, including supports that prevent victim re-traumatization, awareness building, partnership development, service delivery. It is a mandatory criteria that you are a current restorative justice service provider, including community accountability programs and Indigenous justice programs. And in accordance with the current funding models for community accountability programs, proposals must not address issues related to power-based crimes, including gender-based violence, violence against women, sexual assault, and/or hate-motivated crimes. Stream 3, Indigenous Healing, provides up to $40,000 in one-time funding to proposals that will address healing of Indigenous peoples from the impacts of intergenerational trauma, crime, or victimization in communities across British Columbia. In this stream, projects must focus on healing approaches reflective of and/or aligned with Indigenous culture and worldviews, including healing for the individual, the family, and/or the broader community, emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual aspects of healing, and other culturally identified practices that contribute to healing. For this stream, preference may be given to proposals from Indigenous organizations. There's also the opportunity for organizations that may not be truly Indigenous-led, but have an Indigenous-led department or division to be successful in this preference criteria. Non-Indigenous organizations that apply under this stream must demonstrate how they both collaborated or worked with Indigenous partners in project design and how they will partner or collaborate with Indigenous individuals or organizations in implementing the project. Stream number 4, gender-based violence. This stream provides up to $40,000 in one-time funding to proposals that will develop and/or enhance culturally relevant, culturally safe, and trauma-informed responses to gender-based violence, including violence against women in communities across British Columbia. Focus areas for addressing and preventing gender-based violence projects may include, but not limited to, domestic violence, intimate partner violence, sexual assault, sex trafficking, sexual exploitation, including online child sexual exploitation, sex worker safety, and exiting from sex work. Preference may be given to projects that focus on unique needs of Indigenous women and girls, 2S LGBTQIA+ people, racialized survivors, and survivors with disability. The next section we will look at here is the actual step-by-step review of the application itself in terms of the different sections of the application. The first section is fairly straightforward. It is just the information about the applying organization. There are instructions on how to download Adobe in the application guide found on the grant program website. The application forms themselves are distributed in Adobe PDF format. You can get this program for free and in a format that will work for you to be able to apply for this grant program. We do ask that you provide up-to-date contact information for your organization, and should that change over time from when you initially put forward your application versus when funding is announced, if contact information changes, it's extremely important that you let us know of those changes so that we can be in contact with you in regard to your application. You can do that by alerting us at cfogrants@gov.bc.ca to document any of these changes. If you don't know how to reach you, it can delay the dispersal of funds should you be successful. This is what the form might look like. Here is an example of the crime prevention stream form, and as you can see on the left side, which is the first page, the fields on the table pertains to just all the applicant information. The lower part pertains to the type of organization of the applicant, and you can select here what is the most appropriate from these, and if neither of these are appropriate for your organization, there is an option to write the type of your organization. On the right side, the second page of the form, you can indicate whether your organization identifies as completely Indigenous and those that have an Indigenous-led department or division. Also on this page, there are questions whether or not an organization has previously received the civil forfeiture grant and whether the specific project that you are applying for has previously received the civil forfeiture grant. We want to be very clear that the answers to these questions are for information only, and it is not something that we use as a deciding factor. It's more for us to know the state of where you're at with your project. It's not to say that if you've received funding before, you're going to receive it again, or if you've never received funding, then you're not going to get funding. We're not collecting the information for that purposes. It's just to give that broader picture of what's going on. Next thing that you will work is the project executive summary, and this is sort of the elevator pitch, the high-level summary of what your project will intend to do. Ideally, it's no more than 5 sentences. Some key information to include in the section include the name of the project, a clear description of what the project is trying to achieve, a little bit of the description of the participants that you're going to be focusing on, and this includes the number and the specific segment of the target population when relevant. This will help us clarify the focus group that you're going to be the participants for your program. The summary should also include a brief outline of the activities to be implemented, including the number and intensity. It's sometimes of value to leave this section till the very end because by that point you will have filled out the rest of the application and you'll have a really strong understanding of your project, so it can almost be easier to circle back to this stage at the very end. Again, this is for information only and not part of the evaluation process when we distribute the funds. This is an example of what this would look like in the actual application form. And here's an example for project executive summary that catches all of those pieces that we were discussing previously. The next section is the project overview, and this is where you would probably want to spend most of your time when you're putting together the application. This part answers the 5 questions: the who, what, where, when, why of what you want to achieve with your project, and it's of the most importance when we are trying to figure out how to distribute these funds. It defines the scope and sets the boundaries of your projects. There's often interconnected issues that many agencies are working with, and this section can help us understand your place within the sector. We've really tried to make it quite clear what we're looking for. We have listed out the questions in a very sequential format so you can approach this as if you were writing a resume, and you can have these questions in front of you as you're crafting your response. So you can physically check that you're doing each piece and that it's all included in there. What we're looking for in this section is what this project will achieve, the key social issue that you will be addressing with this funding. Why is it important to address this issue? Why is the project needed? Why is there a need for this project with the participants and or community that you're focusing on? For the need of your project, if applicable, highlight any evidence, including research, data, anecdotes, to demonstrate the need. We understand this can be difficult for some organizations because of lack of evidence that may exemplify the need. In some cases, there might not be studies on certain issues, or there's nothing been done. And if that's the case, you can speak to that in your application and use that as an example of why the funding is needed. Section, we will also be looking for who is going to be benefiting from this funding. So who are the intended participants and why are you focusing on these participants? How will you identify and attract these participants? How many participants will be included? How long will participants be engaged in this project? And what supports will you provide to the participant if applicable? For project achievement, what is the end goal of your project, or what are you ultimately trying to do with this funding? How are you going to achieve this goal? What impact will this funding have on your community that you serve and or your organization? Here's an example of what it would look like in the actual application itself and what I was referring to previously. We made a bullet list for you to make it a little more clear in terms of the level of detail that we're asking in this section. We strongly encourage you to use that as a check-off list while crafting a response. You do have quite a few pages to be able to respond to these questions, and you have a freedom to approach this section as a narrative, which works for a lot of people, or you can also use some bullet points if that's easier for you. Both are acceptable. In terms of thinking about your project, you can try to approach it from the SMART lens when developing your project goals. So this means something that's specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and trackable. With project design, this can be a really good roadmap to keep you on track with what you're trying to achieve so that you know for yourself what you're actually proposing is going to be achievable. In terms of being specific, do you know what you want to accomplish? Your goals. Are they well defined? Are they clear? Are they unambiguous? For example, if you say, I want to target at-risk youth, which is quite vague, versus if you say, I plan to offer an after-school sports and mentoring program that will operate 2 times a week with youth that have a criminal record between the ages of 13 and 18. With those two examples, you can see the level of detail and the specificity with the second one. They're both in the same ballpark of what's trying to be achieved, but the second one is way more specific in terms of what being said. In terms of measurable, how are you going to quantify your progress so that you can track it? How many people? How long are they going to be involved with? How much supports are you providing? How will you know when you reach your goal? In terms of achievable, is your project achievable even if it's a challenge? Can you take an inventory of your organization's abilities, skills, and resources to determine this goal that you have? Can you actually reach it in 1 year time frame? Maybe that means you have a bigger picture that you want to achieve as an organization, and this 1 year CFO funding is just a piece of that process. So within your application, we're looking to see that what you're proposing can have something achievable and measurable within that year time frame. Is your goal relevant and realistic? Can you do it within a year? Are you committed to reaching the goal? Is it relevant to the project that you proposed? And is it trackable? Are the objectives and outcomes clearly defined? And is there a time frame that you're working on? And how do you know when you will have reached that success mark? Section 3 is the project key activities, and this will highlight all the key steps necessary for your project implementation. It can sometimes be easier to use bullet points in this section to list the various activities, and where possible, use an evidence-based approach when developing the activities. You also want alignment between what you're putting in here as your activities and with the actual project itself. So there's that thread of continuity throughout the entire proposal that we've been given quite clearly what you intended to do, and now we have a bit of a roadmap of how you're going to do it. It's the step-by-step blueprint for a project in implementation and can include timeframes for service delivery. If you're hiring somebody, the time frame for the posting. If it's ongoing service delivery, it can sometimes be difficult to make that fit into the parameters asked for here. So you can always outline a specific week in life of your program or what a month might look like. That can be sometimes a good way to highlight key activities that are going to be there. So at the end of the day, we know how the money is being spent, what the deliverables are, and who the clients being served are. This is what it would look like in the actual application form. On the top part, you can see an example of the level of detail we are looking for. The next section is the collaboration section. If the stream you are applying has this section, you'll see in a moment when we look at the actual application form itself that it is broken down into a few different sections. The first section is your project truly dependent on the commitment, resources, or collaboration of a different organization? And if this is true, does that relationship already exist? Have you already made first contact with that organization that you need to work with? I want to provide examples here of what this may look like. For example, if your organization wishes to provide in-school training or service delivery, we need to know that the school that you are proposing to work with is on board with this proposal, and they're aware of it and they support it. If you want to train a specific service provider, let's say you want to train the police need to be on board with that. They need to know what you're doing and that it fits well with their parameters, and they need to give consent that this is going to be okay. That is what we're looking for in that first section, is where it's truly necessary for your project to even get off the ground to have that buy-in from these other organizations. The second section asks more broadly, who are you going to be working with within the sector when using this funding and implementing your project? For the second section, we're not looking for those true dependent upon organizations that must be involved. We're looking more for aligned service providers. Maybe you have a referral agency that sends clients your way. Maybe you send clients to a different referral agency. Maybe there's overlapping services or collaboration that happens, or maybe you're involved in working groups with other agencies that are similar to yours. If you have any partnerships like that, we would like to know about them. There's also a third option here if you do not require collaboration at all. Then there's a section for you to explain why you don't need to collaborate with anybody. There is no need, nor is there an expectation for support letters or letters of collaboration to be submitted. The reason we're asking for these established partnerships and the contact information of these individuals is so that, if necessary, our staff can follow up and verify that this relationship is in place. We're trying to make it easier for agencies to apply for funding. We know that it can be quite daunting to collect letters, particularly when you have only 6 weeks to apply for funding. And it's not easy on you as an agency to be chasing down those letters, and it's extra processing for us to receive those as well. Just indicate who your partners are, if you have them, and provide the contact information of who those people are. This is what it looks like in the actual application form. You can see the first section is just yes or no. Are you dependent on the commitment, resources, or collaboration of a different organization? And if yes, has this organization provided their commitment to participate? So please indicate what's the case there and then provide us the details of these established partnerships. The second section is anybody you may be working with when using the funding that you do not depend on for project delivery. So that can be referral agencies, complementary service providers, or support services. And finally, there's a section if you do not require collaboration at all, please explain why. In terms of the weighting of the section, it's important for us to know, but please spend more time on the project overview section than this. In reality, this should not take long if you're truly dependent on a service provider or organization to use this funding. You should know who those people are, and you should have established relationships with them, and it should be quite easy to get the names and contact information of those individuals. The next section to discuss is the resources and experience. This is where you position yourself within the sector as the authority to be able to use the funding in the way that you proposed and implement the project that you've outlined. What we're looking for in this section is the organizational structure in place to support the implementation of the project. That can include similar previous projects that you have implemented that align with what you are proposing here, any previous experience working with the focus participants, project planning done in preparation for getting ready to apply for funding, and staff training and qualifications that relate to the project activities and support needs of the participants. Try to keep as much information as possible relevant to your actual project here. So again, refer back to what you've stated that you intend to do in the project overview section. And in cases where you may not have the necessary experience or expertise or resources in the section, you can explain how you will get those in time for project implementation. This can include the partners that you're going to work with to provide necessary support, and some of the prep work that can be mentioned here can include partner consultation, strategic planning, needs assessment, anything along those lines that will help you with your implementation and help us understand your position within the sector to provide the project that you proposed. This is what it looks like in the application form. You can see how we've broken it down to bullet points, so it's quite clear what we're looking for here, and you can use this again as a roadmap to ensure that you're including all of the relevant information in your response. The next section is the risk management section. If the stream you are applying for has this section, we are asking you to indicate 3 to 5 key risks that you may face in implementation of your project. It is not acceptable to say that there are no risks. Every project has some degree of risk involved with it, and you can refer to this link here to get ideas of what those risks may be. Risk management is an important aspect for us to understand because it gives us that indication that you thought about what could go wrong and you've developed a bit of a plan to mitigate those risks should they arrive. Some examples of these risks that could happen for any project: So you could have staff turnover, you could have difficulty hiring somebody to run the program, you could have insufficient partner participation, you could have insufficient target population willing to participate. There's many things that can happen here in terms of risks, and we just ask that you spend a little bit of time thinking about those and how you might address them. This is what it would look like in the application form. It's pretty clear what we're asking for. They can be operational risks, or they can be risks related to the focus participants themselves. The next section will be the budget. We are looking for a fairly detailed and reasonable budget that gives us an understanding of the value for money that your project will be proposing. We're looking for the scope and reach of the project in comparison to the amount of funding requested. I'll show an example of what it will look like in a moment. It can include salary expenses. When you're including salary expenses, we ask that you please break it down for us and show us the math in terms of how you arrived at the final number. So we're looking for the number of weeks worked, the number of pay periods, the hours per week, the wages, all of that. It is important to use the template provided. Do not make up your own and put it in there. It will not be considered. The template that we provide does not allow entry of cents. We ask that you round up to the nearest dollar for everything. Please do not submit any other financial documents that include annual reports, audits, or any other financial statements. They will not be considered. All we need from you is the budget. In terms of some eligible expenses, this is what is eligible under the grant program. Staffing costs, honoraria for guest speakers, materials and supplies, resource development, for example, toolkits, travel and accommodation, training. In terms of ineligible expenses, capital expenses in general are not supported within the program. This could include office equipment such as computers, laptops, or any other equipment that would be used beyond the duration of the project implementation. When you're thinking of your budget, consider that there's a clear link between what you proposed, what you're trying to achieve, and the budget expenses. We should not be seeing new elements of project design or program delivery in the budget section. It should all be quite clear what you're asking for and how it ties to the overall scope of what you're hoping to achieve. Here is an example of what the budget may look like, including the level of detail that we are seeking with the staffing calculations in particular. You can see here we have included the hours per week, the wage per hour, the amount of pay that somebody would get, the cost of the benefits is included, and then it's all multiplied to provide the total staffing costs. We do ask for the same level of detail for all of the different categories here. We have included a column for the amount from other sources. You do not necessarily need to identify what these other sources are, but it does help us to know if you've secured alternate funding for your projects. One thing you can do to check to make sure that you have your math correct is you can add it up yourself and make sure the column total project expenditures adds up. And then at the bottom part, total for amount requested and amount from other sources should also add up. You can do the math both ways to make sure that everything is accurate across the board with your application. This is what it will look like in the actual application form. The final section is the declaration. We require somebody with authorized signatory of the organization to provide their signature. Please do not submit a file that does not have a signature. It is required to issue payment in the event that you were awarded a grant, so if you do not provide us with a signature, you can expect us to be chasing you down to provide them. The application and declaration forms are in PDF format. If you do not have the ability to generate an e-signature, you can physically sign it with a pen as a traditional wet signature. Do not scan the entire application form. Step 1 of the application is attaching the fillable PDF application form, which should not be scanned. And step 2 is attaching separately in your email the signed declaration form. This streamlines our process in checking whether declaration forms are signed and also helps us in administrative processing of the application forms we receive. We will turn to some tips for applicants for the Civil Forfeiture Grant Program. There is a published application guide produced for you, and we encourage you to thoroughly read that before completing your application form and submitting your proposal. There are unique criteria for each stream, so we encourage you to choose the stream that best fits your project. We encourage you to make sure that your organization is eligible to apply. This means you have a legal business name that aligns with a GST number. Individuals are not eligible for civil forfeiture grant funding. And ensure that your budget request does not exceed the funding limit. There are character counts within the application form, so we ask that you provide clear and concise answers when submitting your application. Do not include links to websites to explain or support a concept. Summarize it in your own words. Have somebody proofread for spelling and grammar errors, and if possible, have more than one person look at your application. Sometimes, when we're working on a document, we can sort of get blinders in terms of what we think we're saying, but it's not actually translated on the page. So it can be really helpful to have somebody else read this for you to double check to make sure that there's really clear understanding of what you're saying. In terms of using acronym, try to avoid them if you can. If you do need to use them, I understand with the character counts it can be difficult to get all the information in. We ask that you define the acronyms the first time. With regard to doing multiple edits, you may opt to first type your answers on a separate Word document, and in that way you can edit your answers before finally transferring or copy-pasting your answers to the PDF application form for submission, keeping in mind the character limits on some fields. Another thing to keep in mind when putting together your application is work under the assumption that the person reading the application itself may have little or no prior knowledge of the work that you're doing and your placement within the sector and your proposal itself. As a service provider, you have depth of understanding of who you serve and what you do, but when you're explaining that to somebody else, you need to keep in mind they don't have the same level of expertise that you do. So really think about that when you're putting together your application. And is somebody who's not in your sector able to understand what you're saying here and the importance of what you do? We ask that you ensure that the application form is complete and declaration form is signed, and both are included in the application email. Ensure that you give yourselves enough time to finish the application process. You do have 6 weeks once the intake starts. We really encourage you to not leave your application to the last minute because you never know what can happen at the 11th hour. So as much as possible, we really encourage you to get them in sooner than later. The applications can be emailed to cfogrants@gov.bc.ca. In terms of how funding decisions are made, we have a formalized review process that we have here at the branch, and it involves all applications being reviewed by a specific person. One person reviews every single application. They are paired with somebody else who is reviewing all of the same applications. Then they come together as a team to develop a consensus in terms of who should be funded in our order of prioritization, what they deem to be funded, which are then get put forward to a committee of executive directors and directors who make the final decision. There's quite a few people involved in this process, and all throughout, it's always an actual person who is reading this information. We remind all of you that this is a very competitive process every year. The amount of requests that we receive is almost double our actually able to support. It means that sometimes really great projects are not getting funded, and it's not that it wasn't a strong application, And it's not that you didn't do a good job, and it's not that we don't see the need. It's just we don't have enough to go around. It's extremely competitive. We also consider geographic distribution when allocating our funds to make sure that we're supporting all corners of the province. Please be mindful of the important dates. The application closure date is indicated on the webpage. All applications must be received no later than 4:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on the application period closure date. You will be notified of the result around May of the following year. The project implementation period will occur from May of the following year to March 31st of the next. The exact dates are indicated on the application guide and the webpage, so be sure to read it. There are some resources on this slide that can help you, and we will be publishing a PDF version of this document should you wish to be able to access these. I'll now spend some time going over some frequently asked questions. These are also included in the application guide. How do I apply for grant funding? The program materials will be posted to the Civil Forfeiture webpage. The link is here on this slide. Please complete the designated application form for the stream you are applying for and sign the declaration form to be considered for funding. Send it to us by 4:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on the application closure date indicated on the website. Who is eligible to apply? There's eligible applicants for each stream as listed in the guideline. Individuals are not eligible to apply, only organizations. Are there restrictions on how funding can be used? Funding is intended for direct project-related expenses only. This may include, but is not limited to, staffing, supplies, resource development, operational support, and honorariums. Capital expenses such as computers, laptops, etc., which can be used beyond the limited timeframe for the project, are not eligible for funding. If you have any questions about your specific project expenses and if they are eligible for funding, we strongly encourage that you reach out to the CFO Grants email and somebody will get back to you and walk you through the specific inquiry regarding eligible expenses. When will applicants know whether they are successful? We are informing applicants in May of the following year. I don't have Adobe Reader. Can I apply using an application form in another format? We strongly encourage that you get the free version of Adobe. It is available at the link here. If you require alternative ways of applying, running into issues, and it's not working out for you, please email the CFO Grants email and somebody will be able to assist you with the application process. I received funding under last year's grant cycle. Can I apply again? Yes, you can absolutely apply again if you previously received funding. However, please keep in mind that the grants are one-time only, and there's no guarantee of funding from year to year. The program is extremely competitive for the applicants and funding is limited. Can I apply under more than one funding stream? Yes, the organization can apply under multiple streams as long as each application is for a different project. You cannot apply under multiple streams for the same project. You can also apply more than once under one stream. For example, you wanted to put forward 2 proposals under the gender-based violence stream. By all means, you can absolutely do that. It just cannot be the exact same application going into more than one stream. I applied last year but did not receive funding. Do I have to apply again, or will you reconsider my application? You must apply again using the current year's application form. Applications submitted using forms from previous grant cycles will not be accepted. Since the application criteria and streams are revised annually, it is important that your application aligns with the current year's stream criteria. Why not provide stable core funding for services instead of one-time only project funding? This is a grant program, and the funding provided through the program is intended to be one-time limited and for a specific purpose. Civil forfeiture proceeds vary from one year to the next. There is no certainty about how much funding may be available for grants in a given year, so we are not able to commit to multi-year project through this funding source. How are priorities for funding determined? The proposed priority areas for grants are established through consideration of the ministry's current strategic initiatives and priorities. What is the approval process for awarding grants? We have established a comprehensive internal review process to assess the applications and recommend projects for funding. We also have an oversight committee comprised of senior staff that reviews and approves all funding recommendations. What documents should I include? Submit your completed application form and the signed declaration form. Why has the collaboration section changed? Requesting details on confirmed necessary collaborative partnerships rather than collaboration letters eases the time commitment on applicants while still providing necessary information for evaluating proposed projects. What is the difference between the two tables in the collaboration section? The first table requests contact information for partners that are integral to implementing your project. This means your project cannot happen without the involvement of this partner. Examples include delivering school-based programming, which requires approval of the school, or training a specific service provider or agency, such as police department or school. The second section seeks information on partners your organization routinely works with but is not required for implementation of your project. This may include service providers providing complementary services or organizations that send your organization client referrals. That was the final slide for the webinar. If you still feel that you have questions that have not been answered, I encourage you to reach out to the grant team at cfogrants@gov.bc.ca. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing your applications.